Chapter 14. Carter tossed and turned, kicking the sheets off the bed. He was a live wire. Frustration and indecision taking turns jolting through his system. His bride had locked herself in the bathroom more than an hour ago. Judging from the silence, she'd fallen asleep on the floor. Officially the worst wedding night in matrimonial history. It was his wedding night for Alpha's sake. She wasn't really his bride, and it wasn't really their wedding night, so the reality shouldn't have weighed on him so heavily, but it did. He'd handled the situation piss poorly, but if she knew he'd pulled away for her benefit, she wouldn't have been angry. If he'd let himself go, and had given in to the lust spiraling in his core, things would have gotten too complicated too quickly. I don't want this. Why'd he say it that way? On a groan, Carter smacked himself in the forehead and scrubbed his fingers through his hair. Of course he wanted her. Judging by the massive aching erection pitching the sheets, he still did. But damn it, he couldn't spoil what they had. She was one of his best friends. He drew his feet over the side of the bed, sat up, and stared at the slice of black space beneath the bathroom door. She was right there. Not 20 feet away. Go to her. His hands ached to feel her again, his mouth to brush against hers. She was like a volcano, hotter than he'd expected, and had melted his defenses. She'd erupted beneath his touch, lighting him on fire in a way he'd never known. He hadn't been expecting that. How was it possible that Faith was a vixen in bed? There was chemistry between them. Undeniable, gut-clenching chemistry, but he couldn't get involved. Things were too complicated, and they'd only get worse if he didn't stay focused on what they were doing here in the first place. He had serious trust issues with the opposite sex, and he and Faith were friends. He actually enjoyed her company. If they'd skipped down the yellow, orgasmic road, he knew where they'd become morning. He'd turn into the same guy he always did when relationships threatened to spill over to the next level. Controlling, possessive, and constantly thinking his girlfriend was going to cheat on him. Thank you, cheating first wife. He'd be possessive over whom Faith went out with and whom she talked to. He'd feel more of a claim to her than he should. His trust issues would destroy their friendship. It was inevitable. It had happened before, and it would happen again. As he rested his elbow on his knee and his head in his hand, a soft sound escaped the bathroom. Was she crying? He stood and shuffled to the door. He reached for the handle, and stopped as the whimper hit his ears. He clenched his hand into a fist and held it to the door. Knock. Call her name. Ask if she's okay. Don't be an asshole. Swallowing hard, Carter put his forehead to the door and listened. More whimpers. Tears falling to the tile floor. His stomach soured with regret. He couldn't fix this. No matter what he did, he was screwed. Faith didn't understand. It's not that he didn't want her. He didn't want to spoil what they had. An overwhelming sense of dread snaked around his heart and squeezed. He blew out a soft breath and backed away from the door, hands clenched into fists and a hole burning in the back of his throat. Carter dumped himself onto the bed and covered his head with a pillow. Room service. 2 muffled knocks rattled in the distance. Hello? Mr. Ann. Mrs. Griffin. Rousing from her slumber, Faith rubbed the heels of her hands over her eyes. It took her a few seconds to remember why she was in the bathroom, curled into the jacuzzi tub. Carter. Let him answer the door. Another round of knocks pounded against her skull. Not really, but they might as well have. She tried to roll out of the tub but slipped, falling to the floor in a tangled heap of bedsheets. Fighting to her feet, she cracked the door and peeked into the suite. Carter was gone. Tiptoeing out, she checked the bed, the floor, beneath the table. Nothing. Room service for Mr. and Mrs. Carter Griffin, the annoying voice called. Again. I have a breakfast spread for the newlyweds, courtesy of the elopement package. Newlyweds, my ass. She was grouchy but had every right. She'd thrown herself at Carter and had been rejected in the most embarrassing way. Couldn't he have told her he wasn't interested before she stripped? Would have saved her some dignity. I'm coming. She pulled open the door. A round man pushing a silver cart swept inside, smiling much too eagerly for the hour. He lifted the silver lids on a few dishes, revealing eggs, bacon, sausage, and pancakes. Breakfast fit for a king and his queen. Too bad she and Carter weren't either of those things. They were more like the court jester and his fat, fake mistress. That wasn't close either. She wasn't fat, just curvy. After she tipped the round man and he left the room, Faith noticed a small note card folded on the table near the bathroom door. She picked it up and read, "Faith, I went on the adventure tour alone. I'll tell the others that you had a hangover and are resting today. Sorry about the way things went down last night. See, sorry. The hell he was." She snatched a piece of bacon off the tray, chomped off the tip and stared out over the harbor. He went on the adventure tour alone. Want to go anyway, she thought, shoving the rest of the bacon strip into her mouth. But if she stayed in, that would mean she'd be burying her head in the sand. Carter wouldn't be able to avoid her that easily. She downright refused to cower in the shadows while he went out on some sort of adventure with his colleagues. She may have been a chocoholic and 15 pounds, 25 pounds overweight, but she was no coward. A foreign emotion surged through her veins. Confidence. If Carter didn't want her and didn't think she was attractive, that was fine. That didn't mean there wasn't someone out there for her. How many brides thought of other men and future husbands the day after they got married? Probably not many, but under the circumstances, why shouldn't she? Their marriage was a sham. Why hold out for Carter when he'd made it perfectly clear that he didn't want her? She couldn't be like the other bimbos he dated. She tried at the Owenses' party and had seriously botched the job, but she could be a better version of herself. One that deserved a man who loved her and thought she was beautiful. With her sweet tooth, soft hips, plain clothes and all. From here on out, she'd be the best damned version of Faith she could be. 10 minutes later she was dressed in jeans, a tight red sweater she'd picked up while shopping for the wedding ensemble yesterday. Turned out it was easier to find clothes fit for a harlot than a bride. And tall boots. She fluffed her hair and teased the back until her comb got stuck. She lined her eyes heavier than normal and was surprised to find that it emphasized their almond shape. She applied pink gloss on her lips, mashed them together and smiled into the mirror at the final result. She popped open her computer, replied to comments on Have a Little Faith and updated a few sidebar widgets in record time. She thought about making a note about Victoria. Maybe later today she'd sidle over to a few pet stores and check their stock. She closed her laptop and double-checked her appearance in the mirror. Good to go. Once in the lobby, she approached the front desk. A 6-foot-tall, broad-shouldered, floppy-haired concierge in his 30s grinned and looked up from his muscle and fitness magazine. "Excuse me," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. There was a big group of people gathered in the lobby at dawn going on some kind of adventure tour. Did you happen to see them? You're talking about the Seattle police force staying with us? Policing jerks. That's them. You missed them by about 15 minutes. Do you know where they were headed? I do actually. I suggested the trip. He turned away from her and rummaged through a stack of glossy pamphlets. I'd like to join them if I could. Think that's possible? No problem, he said, placing a pamphlet on the counter and flattening it in front of her. Her stomach dropped as he pointed to the graphic on the center page. There. Doing this. Need a ride? She nodded. And a barf bag. After enduring a 45-minute drive to Sook Potholes Provincial Park and another 20-minute ride on all-terrain vehicles through the forest, Carter felt no better about the way things had ended last night. He stood on a platform above the trees, staring out over 2 suspension bridges and 8 zip lines of different lengths, wondering if he'd done the right thing. He should have woken her up this morning, knocked on the bathroom door to let her know he was leaving. For the last 15 minutes, everyone had milled about, getting ready for the big plunge, oblivious to the war raging inside him. He'd royally screwed over his wife by not screwing her the way he should have, the way he truly wanted to. This is about letting go and having fun, the captain said as the tour people suited him up with a seat harness and climbing helmet. Only don't let go. He laughed, tugging on the rope attaching him to the line above his head. See you on the other side. The tour guide pushed him from behind and he was off, soaring over the tops of the trees. Once out of sight, the captain roared, sending birds scattering from the bushy green canopies. Next, the tour guide said. You, sir. The guide suited up 8 high-ranking officials and their mates, and each of them soared through the trees, some following the captain, others disappearing between trees in opposite directions. Mr. and Mrs. Owens were some of the few left to go. They huddled near the corner of the platform, fidgeting with their harnesses. Sorry your wife couldn't make it, Lieutenant Mark said from beside him. The guy was 500 years old and just over 200 pounds, barely making the height and weight requirements for the ride. The helmet on his head looked more like a yarmulke than a piece of protective equipment. Tell her she was missed. I will. Because she was. We simply had too much fun celebrating our wedding last night. Attaboy. The lieutenant patted Carter on the shoulder. Wait, isn't that her? Carter turned. Below them, a four-wheeler skidded to a stop. The driver wore a motocross helmet etched with a glowing green skull and crossbones on the top. Faith straddled the quad behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. Thanks for the ride, she hollered as she dismounted. She handed him the helmet, which he locked to the bar on the back of the four-wheeler. I'll let you know how it goes when I get back tonight. Tonight? She was talking to this guy like she knew him, like she was comfortable with him. Carter growled low in his belly. The lieutenant spun on his heel and attached his line to the next available hook. Faith climbed the stairs and met Carter on the tower. Her hair was windblown, her cheeks flushed pink, and her sweater, it was skin-tight, hugging her breasts. He'd gotten so used to seeing her in baggy clothes the tightness of the sweater shocked him. Hey sweetie, she said, reaching on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. His skin buzzed. I'm feeling so much better than I did this morning. I'm glad. He smiled tightly. Are you sure you're up for this? Of course I am. She studied the lines. Rick and I had a great talk on the way over. He calmed me down about this whole thing. Rick. She picked up a helmet and fitted it on her head. On anyone else it would have looked dorky as hell. Faith somehow made helmets fashionable and adorable. Rick's the concierge from the hotel. His palms itched. The concierge drove you all the way out here? She pulled down the bottom of her sweater, emphasizing the plumpness of her breasts. Wasn't that nice of him? Sure was. Sure wanted to break his neck too. Did he hit on you? The words tumbled out before he could catch them. I'm not sure. Maybe a little. She shrugged shyly. Just because you don't find me attractive doesn't mean others don't. Of course he shouldn't be others. His tongue tied itself into a gigantic knot. You think I don't find you attractive? I'm over the games, Carter, and I'm ready to fly. The guide suited her up, tugged on the buckles and adjusted the strap around her hips. Mrs. Owens made her way over and embraced Faith in a hug. Look at you, dear. You always look so spectacular. She held Faith's hand in hers and raised it, so that Faith could do a twirl. You've got a dream figure, darling. Perfect. Hourglass. Carter froze, taken aback by Mrs. Owens's outpouring of flattery. Faith looked hot, he couldn't deny. But she didn't always look this way. Back at home she dressed in sweats and black stretchy pants paired with bulky sweatshirts. Now that Mrs. Owens mentioned it, Faith really did have an hourglass shape. Didn't she? His hands itched with the desire to ghost over those reckless curves. That's so sweet of you to say, Mrs. Owens. Blushing, Faith walked to the edge of the platform and turned back to look at Carter. Will you be behind me? A shit. What he wouldn't give to be behind her, pounding into her wetness. Carter. Yeah, I'll be right behind you. He wished. No, wait, he didn't. That wasn't what he wanted. How easily she could make him forget. She hadn't been here more than 5 minutes. Mr. and Mrs. Owens took off along the zip lines ahead of Faith. Once they were a safe distance away, she shuffled to the edge of the platform. The tour guide waited, hand extended, to attach Faith's harness to the line. Only she was still grinning at Carter over her shoulder. She stepped too far, and her right foot pitched over the edge. She lost her balance, reached for the rail for the tour guide and got air. Carter moved lightning fast. He seized her wrist and held tight, yanking her back. She crashed into the tour guide, who was trying to be useful and failing. They toppled. Her wrist broke loose from his grip as she flailed in a funky, panicked attempt to brace her fall. She and the tour guide tangled together in a mess of arms and legs before falling to the platform. Faith landed on her back, the guide squarely on top of her. Rising up on his arms, the putsy guide looked down at her, smiling. Get off. Growling, Carter lifted the guide from the floor by the scruff of his collar. I'm off, the guide said, raising his hands in surrender. My shirt. Man. Faith got to her feet and rubbed the small of her back. Let go, Carter, it was an accident. Are you all right? The tour guide smiled at Faith. That was quite the tumble, sweet cheeks. Carter tightened his hold. You better cut the sweet cheeks or you'll be tumbling with me. Don't let him bother you. He's having a bad day. Faith patted the guide on the shoulder. We got married yesterday and we haven't had sex yet. He's got a serious case of blue balls. He did, but damn. Did she have to out him that way? What's the deal, man? The guide twisted in Carter's grasp, his gaze raking over Faith's body like a hungry predator. If you ain't into her, you should get your eyes checked. Oh, he was into her all right. So much so that he couldn't think about anything else. Using one hand, Carter cinched the guide up until his feet dangled in midair. Oh, sweetie, Faith said, planting her hand on her harnessed hip. Isn't that sweet? He finds me attractive just like the concierge did. Without waiting for Carter to release the putsy guide, Faith hooked herself up to the zip line. Like this? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. The guide gave a thumbs up and she was off. Carter dropped him to the platform as Faith took off, screaming in delight. She leaned back until she was upside down and thrust her feet in the air, arms extending to her sides. Mrs. Owens looked back, caught sight of Faith and screeched with joy. If Carter bit his tongue any harder, he'd chew the damn thing in half. He yearned to be the one smiling and laughing with Faith. He ached to be the one giving her the confidence to ride the lines this way, the one she'd talk to at the end of the day. Instead, he wanted to kill every guy within a 10-mile radius. She's not your wife. You're not her husband. She's not yours. Although the words resonated with the logical part of Carter's brain, he dismissed them with a gut-clenching growl. The wolf part of him craved being near her, dragging her against him, and claiming her as his own. This was precisely the reason he needed to keep the boundaries clear. Chapter 15. After they returned to the Monarch, the members of the Bureau scattered. A few retreated to their rooms. The excitement of the day had gotten to them, and a large group headed to the bar of the hotel for pre-dinner drinks, leaving Faith, Carter, and the Owenses standing in the lobby. I'm so glad you felt well enough to make it, Mrs. Owens said, leaning against a pillar. We've never been ziplining as a group before, and after today's fun, I doubt it will be the last. It was amazing, Faith said, watching Carter head to the front desk out of the corner of her eye. I'm glad my hangover wore off. And Carter said you were afraid of heights. Mrs. Owens palmed her forehead. That trick where you hung upside down was spectacular. I think the captain took a snapshot with his phone. He'll have to send you a copy. Faith smiled, remembering how surprisingly freeing the adventure felt. That'd be great. I don't think anyone back home will believe I did it. I'm going to need the proof. Isn't it amazing what we're capable of when we put our minds to it? Really was. Dawson had set his mind on Yale and had gotten accepted because of the work ethic and determination he'd gotten from their father. To get the detective position he'd dreamed of, Carter was willing to marry someone he had zero interest in. Not that it didn't miff her to think about it. She made the decision here and now. The second she got home, she was going to use them as an example of how to lead the rest of her life. She'd have a little Faith succeed, come hell or high water. Whatever she had to do, she'd make it happen. If it meant she had to pull all-nighters or invest in promotional opportunities, she would. Couldn't agree more. Faith nodded. What should she do first? After the cake disaster following the Owens' dinner, it was clear her cooking could use a boost. Maybe she'd enroll in culinary classes at the senior center. She'd always wanted to learn how to dance too. Tracy had tried to drag her to ballroom for singles night at Cosmos, but Faith had always insisted her two left feet wouldn't allow her to attend. What was stopping her now? A husband who didn't want her? A brother who was going to be gone at college? Those things pointed to joining the ballroom classes, not steering clear of them. Have you heard about our next dinner for the Bureau? Mrs. Owens touched Faith's arm. Did Carter tell you? No, he didn't. Faith eyed the way he was talking to hotel services Tinker Bell. The little pixie was leaning far over the counter, her shirt slouching in front to put her barely there breasts on display. Of course Carter would be interested. Tink was more his type than any other woman standing in the lobby. He doesn't tell me anything. Men are terrible at relaying things, aren't they? Mrs. Owens snickered. The Bureau didn't feel it was fair to host the two of you this weekend and leave Nate and his new bride out in the cold. Since Nate couldn't come, the captain suggested we have our next monthly meeting at his place to get a better feel for his home and his family. Oh no. Having the dinner party at Nate's would entail looking at pictures, having drinks in the backyard, and getting to know them on an intimate level on their turf. Why not have it at our place? Faith blurted, desperate for the upper hand. If they host, they'll have to spend time cooking and cleaning rather than getting to know you all. Let me honor Nate and his bride with a dinner at our home. Mrs. Owens grinned. Are you sure? Absolutely. She'd have the party catered and hire a cleaning service if she had to. She'd get the extra cash from her husband. He wouldn't mind. The cooking is intense, Mrs. Owens said, smoothing down her blonde locks. But I managed to handle it fine enough, as any good wife should. Where the hell was she? Stepford? But Mrs. Owens wasn't a Stepford wife. She was generous and sweet, and one of the friendliest wives in the bureau Faith had met. If Mrs. Owens could host a party like the last one, Faith could do it too. Mark it on your calendar, Faith said. The next bureau meeting is at our place. Honey. Carter touched her arm, startling her. Can I talk to you? She spun around. Sure. See you soon, Mrs. Owens. After parting ways with one of the nicest ladies in the bureau, Faith let Carter lead her outside, down the Monarch steps, to a walkway lining the harbor. Boats bobbed just offshore, a few lights twinkling here and there. Light posts guided their way around the edge of the harbor, illuminating a quaint concrete walk lined by the occasional flower bed. Despite the tension flowing off Carter in waves, the night was relatively still and the walk romantic. This whole place oozed starry-eyed fantasies. Was easy to dream of a romantic, whimsical night when her reality was grim. She'd crushed on Carter for a year, married him, almost bedded him, and been rejected. Peachy. Disappointment hollowed out her belly, but she tried to ignore the ache by thinking about her plans when she got back to Seattle. Update the blog. Invest in herself. Cook more. Worry less. Don't get attached to men who don't want you. What's this about? She asked as Carter's pace slowed near a man playing a violin for cash. What couldn't you talk to me about in there? Did I hear you right? He frowned. We're having the members of the bureau over to our house. She nodded excitedly. Good, right? They were going to let Nate host the next monthly meeting, but I was in the position to swoop up the opportunity, so I did. Go on, she said, bumping into his shoulder. Say you're proud of my mad swooping skills. He stopped walking. What's gotten into you? Tension shot through her. Excuse me. She whirled around on him. What do you mean, what's gotten into me? You should be thanking me for stealing that opportunity away from Nate. Do you know that the captain meets with the host privately before the party to arrange the menu and seating arrangements? Do you know if the meeting is a hit, they'd be more inclined to have meetings at the same place in the future? I couldn't stand by and let Nate take that away. Carter's jaw clenched until it looked like it was going to snap clean off. You've forgotten one very important thing. What's that? The burned baking pan on your front porch? The warning to all the other pans in your house. Oh, that. She shrugged. I'll learn how to cook in a month. He didn't look amused. I can do it. I just realized I can do anything. She grinned. And I might be moving to Stepford. His face scrunched. What? Nothing. Poor attempt at a joke. She kept walking. He followed eventually. I'll take cooking classes. I should have done that a long time ago. I don't mind. I used to enjoy school. What about cooking? Have you ever enjoyed that? Not especially, but if I learned how to make a dish right, I might. Carter slowed his pace to match hers as they passed a couple attached to each other's faces, leaning against one of the light poles. We've got one more problem. His words came out crisp and low. We don't live together, yet we're having the party at our house. Don't you think it's going to be strange that your stuff isn't there or there aren't any pictures of us anywhere? She bit her lip. Your place does lack a woman's touch. It does. Oh, come on, you know it's a bachelor pad. You've got black leather couches, liquor stocked for the apocalypse, and a picture of Tom Selleck made out of crushed velvet hanging in your dining room. He pointed at her, lips tight. I got that picture at auction. It's classic. It's not a Monet. A woman would never let you hang that picture somewhere. People are eating. She paused, thinking over their options. Nothing seemed clearer than the one staring her in the face. I'll move in when we get back. I'll stay in your guest room downstairs and you can stay in your room. We'll have separate baths and share the living room and kitchen. I'll decorate and spruce the place up, but not too much. I'll pay you half the rent for a few months if you'll. Don't be ridiculous, you wouldn't have to pay rent. You'll still have the rent at your place. I couldn't ask you to pay double for the months you're staying with me. She was about to push the point when he said, save the money for Dawson. What could she say to that? Okay, Rumi. She stopped and turned to him. Moonlight streaming through the clouds caught on his eyes just so, accenting their pale blue clarity. Her heart stuttered, even though she'd told it not to. Damn treacherous thing. If we're done here, I've got to get back inside. I told Rick I'd meet him in the lobby to tell him about the trip. Rick. It came off his lips as a growl. You're meeting him now? Unless there's more you want to talk to me about. What's gotten into you? He asked, leveling her with a piercing stare. There was no moonlight lightening his eyes now. They were dark and cold. You show up to the zip lines in this. He motioned from her boots to her sweater. Talk about some hotel rat named Rick. Nearly break your neck only to flirt with a tour guide and then fly around the skies like you own them. I thought you were afraid of heights. I got over it. It was all she could get out before he fired off another question. And you hated tight clothes. I've never seen you in a sexy sweater like this. 1. This is sexy? She pressed her hands down her sides, smoothing the sweater at her waist. Stop doing that. He paced a tight circle, then came at her, stopping short of pressing his body against hers. You don't flirt, you don't meet guys in lobbies of hotels, and you don't agree to cook for the entire bureau. This isn't you. I thought you said from here on out you were going to be yourself. Surprisingly, she hadn't been trying to be anyone but herself any of those times. After Rick had told her that no one had gotten injured from the zip line since their opening 15 years earlier, she'd gotten over her fear. It wasn't heights that she'd been afraid of after all. It was falling. Trusting in the strength of the cords gave her the courage to have the most fun she'd had in ages. And she liked the way the red sweater accented her breasts yet smoothed down the extra curves around her waist. It was the most flattering thing she'd bought in years. She hadn't really thought sweaters could be sexy, but judging from Carter's expression, she'd been wrong. This is me, Carter, she said, lifting her arms to her sides. I'm the same person I was 2 days ago, back at my cabin when you asked me to come here. Just because I'm wearing something I don't usually wear and talking to someone in the lobby doesn't mean I'm different. We still have a deal if that's what you were worried about. So you are talking to him? To who? Rick. She shook her head. Is that all you heard? She'd never seen him this worked up. A thin layer of sweat clung to his forehead. His pulse raced. She could hear it in the silence stretching between them. He paused, his chest rising up and down as if he were out of breath. I'm not worried about the deal. Then what? He shoved his fingers through his hair. I'm worried about you. She stepped back toward the embankment, beneath a flickering umbrella of light, and hopped up on the concrete half-wall separating the walkway from a patch of grass. You've got no reason to worry about me, she said. I'm not yours. You are mine. He advanced and then stopped suddenly, a look of shock flashing over his face. For the next few months you're my wife. But I'm not your woman or your mate. She kicked her legs over the edge. If I want to talk to a stranger in the bar until midnight, I will, as long as it doesn't interfere with our agreement or your chances of getting the detective position. The light overhead flickered to black. In the temporary dark, Faith heard the hard and true thump-thump of Carter's heartbeat, his heavy intake and exhale of breath, and the clunk of his heel as he eliminated the space between them. Carter, he whispered, let me try something. And in the next instant, his hand was on her cheek. She flinched, but his fingers lingered, the pads brushing against her skin in a loving caress. She couldn't help it. The tenderness of his touch forced her eyes closed. His hand glided to the back of her neck and he gave a little tug, scooting her to the very edge of the half-wall. He stood against the concrete, his hips pressing her thighs apart. Her breath hitched as he tilted her head up with his fingers and planted an open-mouthed kiss on her neck. Sparks sizzled across her skin and warmed her. From the inside out. She shouldn't be doing this. He didn't want her last night. What changed? His tongue shot out tantalizingly slow, tracing her scar from her jawline down. The side of her neck. Quivering, she reached out for him and grazed her nails. Down his back. Then she grabbed fistfuls of his shirt and shoved him away from her. Are you the same person you were last night? She asked, willing her racing. Heart to still. His face was close to hers and closing in. I am. Am I the same woman? I hope so. The words were spoken from a smiling mouth, one that was going to kiss her and stop her heart in 2 seconds flat. God, he smelled good. Like pine and wood smoke. She held him at arm's length. I thought we were friends. We are. I was thinking we could try friends with benefits on for size. God, he'd probably benefit as well as he kissed. When it comes to you and me, it's friends only. She was dead tired of playing games. Her heart couldn't take it. She didn't want to be friends with benefits with Carter. She wanted more. Damn it, she deserved more. She pushed him away and hopped off the wall. If you want benefits, you'll have to find it somewhere else. After we're divorced, that is. As she walked away, knees shaking, she chanced a glance back. Carter cursed and kicked the post. The light flickered on. Chapter 17. She could not, under any circumstances, sleep with her husband again. Sleeping with Carter was everything Faith had always thought it would be and more. It was magical. His touch was tender, yet when it came to getting down and dirty, he wasn't afraid to make a move and turn her around. Best sex ever. She told herself she wouldn't get involved with him that way. She'd said they'd be friends only. What did she do? Slept with him the moment he gazed into her eyes and made her feel beautiful. In that moment, it didn't matter that they wanted different things. She wanted a relationship and he wanted friends with benefits. She would have given the world to lie in his arms like that for another second, minute, hour, whatever. Way to throw the wrong signal. The last thing she wanted was to be seen as a floozy. Someone like Paisley. Someone who would jump into the sack with Carter after a few smooth lines. But she was nothing like Paisley, she rationalized to herself. Paisley was probably the aggressor when it came to sex. She probably took control. She was probably a strumpet, granting Carter's every fantasy. Faith had smacked herself on the forehead so many times after Carter sprinted out of bed. He took an hour-long shower, probably to scrub her scent off his body parts. He told her good night and slept on the floor beside the bed. He tossed and turned the rest of the night, the same way she did. She knew. Because his pathetic attempt at snoring should have won him an Academy Award. She must have been desperate to sleep with someone who had zero romantic interest in her. How had she fallen for his seduction tactic so easily? He was a flirt. She knew that about him already. He'd probably seduced hundreds of women before. She didn't know for sure, but he was a serial dater, so who knew what his actual sleazy tally was? She'd fallen for a pro after all. Did he keep a black book with all his conquests? She'd have to search through his office for that when she moved in. Did he still call Paisley when the nights got long and he got lonely? Would she jump at the chance to slide into bed with him, even though she was newly married? Faith bet, given the chance, Paisley would ditch Nate for Carter. Faith would have to seriously raise her defenses if she didn't want to fall head over heels in love with Carter. Thankfully, he was in meetings with the captain and other members of the bureau almost the entire day Sunday. If she had to do another adventure tour, she might have buried her head under her pillow and slept the day away. During the afternoon ferry ride and drive back to Seattle, she barely looked at him. It wasn't until he dropped her off at her place and turned off the Tahoe that she finally met his gaze. Guess I'll see you tonight, she said, popping open the passenger door. His face scrunched. What's tonight? I'm bringing a few things over to start the move. Who knows when a member of the bureau will stop by. He tapped the steering wheel as he gazed deep into the forest surrounding her cabin. I can't be there. Can't be there or wouldn't be. He slid a key off the ring hanging from the ignition. This one's for my front door. Let yourself in, but make sure you lock it when you leave. When will you be home? Home. He said the word as if it tasted sour. Not until later. I've got long day at the office today and some research to do after hours tonight. Fine by me. She took the house key and hopped out of the truck, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Which room do you want me to take? He rubbed his temples. The one closest to the living room is fine. The one farthest from his. Good call. She might not be tempted to tiptoe across the hall and slink into bed with a few doors separating them. Sounds good, she said, adding more pep to her step than she felt. See you, Carter. He waited until she stepped inside her cabin before he left her drive, and even then it seemed like he hesitated before pulling onto the street. She glanced out the window, waiting to see if he'd turn around, every nerve in her body on edge. Instead, from the opposite direction, Tracy's midnight blue Volvo turned in. Faith's stomach twisted into a knot, but what did she expect? A non-fairy tale to suddenly turn into one? Not likely. Disappointed beyond words, Faith tossed her bag into her room, shut the door, and pressed play on the answering machine sitting on the kitchen hutch. 2 messages. Alert the media. 2 messages in 3 days? Boy, she was popular. Every hot, eligible bachelor in Seattle was beating down her door. She pulled down a bottle of Apothic Red from the top of her fridge and poured a glass, keeping an ear open. The machine droned. First message, Saturday, 9 p.m. Hey Faithy, it's Dawson. The conference is awesome. You wouldn't believe how many people my professor has introduced me to. I even met one guy who reminded me of Dad. He went to Yale, majored in design with the same emphasis, and graduated a few years after. Faith's throat squeezed. Dawson really missed their father more than she might have realized. Now that he was following in his footsteps, Dawson sounded content, happier than he had in years. Just calling to say thank you, he continued. I couldn't do this without you. As Faith gulped down the last of the wine, the front door slammed shut. Faith, Tracy called. Your dog's got serious identity issues. Faith turned the corner as her black and white furball ran at her feet, yapping as if to welcome her home. Hey, she said, picking Humperdinck up in her arms. How'd you do at Tracy's? He mounted the damn cat. Tracy set the travel kennel beside the couch. You're going to have Siamese Yorkies if you don't do something about him. Faith held him up to get a good look at those adorable puppy dog eyes. You're my goal this week, but I need to focus on me too. We'll work our issues out together, how's that sound? As Humperdinck whimpered in reply, the machine beeped and rattled off the second message. It was probably Dawson again, this time happy and drunk. Sunday, 2:30 p.m. That wasn't more than an hour ago. She just missed the message. Faith Hamilton, this is Jack Winchester from Waggingtail's Dog Supplies in Sacramento, California. I'm calling in regard to your blog, Have a Little Faith. I've had more than a few customers come in requesting products featured on your blog and was wondering if we could talk about product placement and advertising options. I'm very interested in working with you. My phone number. As Faith scrambled to find pen and paper, Humperdinck squirmed to get down. She set him at her feet and copied the number as Jack Winchester recited it. Sounds like a serious offer. Tracy's eyebrows shot up. From Sacramento, no less. Your blog must be doing well. I haven't had a chance to look in the past few days, actually. We just got back. We? I was going to ask how your romantic getaway was, but I guess that answered it. Faith had called Tracy earlier while Carter was in meetings and filled her in on the details of their dry business deal, wham-bam engagement, and phony baloney marriage. Tracy disapproved, stating that they should have made a clause where Faith could sleep around on the side. So Faith had left out that she had in fact slept around with her new husband. Stop it. You know what I mean. Faith dragged her laptop from beneath her couch, her super-duper secret hiding spot, a place thieves would never think to look, and swiped the mouse to turn it on. A few clicks later and she was starting up her page. Holy shit. Page clicks were through the roof. Overall views had doubled. 86. Comments were awaiting approval. 80 comments in 2 days? Faith gawked at the screen. That's amazing. Tracy leaned over her shoulder. No wonder the Winchester rifleman is calling you to advertise his stock. There's more than one Winchester. Faith scrolled through her hits and the search engines supplying them. The man sells dog supplies, not rifles. Could be both. Tracy poured herself a glass of wine, plopped onto the couch, and shrugged. Never know. He's not both. What happened to make Have a Little Faith take off in a little more than 48 hours? She hadn't done anything differently, yet the spikes in views and comments were undeniable. She'd have to make sure to carve out a solid chunk of time out of her schedule each night to answer questions and write new posts. Wouldn't want to lose momentum. Glancing down at Humperdinck as his tiny tail wagged over the hardwood, Faith got an idea. She'd make the pooch her new project, post photos and video and record his training and progress. At the end, she'd announce that he was up for adoption. With all the views, he was sure to go to a good home. Now that she had a solution for Humperdinck, all that was left was solving her own problems. She had a move to make, a dog blog to run, dinner to cook for the bureau in a few weeks, and a husband to gleefully irritate. "You've got that crazy look in your eye," Tracy said. "What's tickin'?" Faith smiled. "Know any chefs looking to give private cooking lessons?" "No, but there's a hot one giving sessions at the senior center." Faith's spirit soared. "Perfect. That'll work," she hoped. Carter worked through the afternoon and straight into the night. He hadn't even noticed that everyone had filed out until he rose from his seat to raid the vending machine and found the entire 12th floor vacant. His stomach growled as he punched the buttons for a Twix. The bars holding the chocolate sticks twisted and turned, and stopped short of releasing it. "Come on." He pounded his fist against the glass. Gravity defied him. The bar didn't budge. Hell, fate defied him. What was the issue with Faith and the luminary pull? He'd been around the werewolf block for a little over 100 years and he'd never, not once, heard of someone having two luminaries. That wouldn't even make sense. Candyless, Carter retreated to his office, closed the files he'd been working on for the bureau, and pulled up the general internet search function for the Seattle Wolfpack's computer system. He typed luminaries, and read a handful of articles relaying information he'd heard 1,000 times before. Luminaries were fated mates, bonding with one's luminary extended his or her life to 1,000 years, strengthening both partners, blah blah. He skimmed. Clearing the initial search, he typed dual luminaries. No search results found. He scratched his head and stared out over the city of Seattle. It was supposed to storm for the next few days. Relentless, battering rain coupled with intense wind gusts that would die off tomorrow morning. Die off. An idea pinged. He typed deceased luminaries into the search bar. A few articles popped up, including one from 1976 about a man from Auburn who lost his wife in a tragic hunting accident 30 years prior. Carter clicked on the link and read. Jameson Clark, age 253, claims to have found his second luminary last month, while boating on Lake Washington. He and his new companion, Jenna, age 31, completed the bonding ritual in an intimate ceremony at Clark's home a few weeks after meeting. While the theory of multiple luminaries has never been proven or disproven, this reporter remarks that the Clarks seem content. "So maybe it's possible to have two luminaries," Carter whispered aloud. He queued up a search for Jameson Clark and found 2 additional articles. The first article was a tiny piece in the back of the Seattle Mariner. It was from 1991. Carter read aloud. The Jameson Clark story of discovering 2 luminaries continues to twist. Clark now reports finding a third luminary, Cynthia, age 21, at a Christmas party in Portland, Oregon. No one has been able to explain this tale, and many consider Jameson to be a liar or joker at best. Few recall Clark's first wife and luminary, Francine Clark, was killed during an unfortunate hunting accident in the Wenatchee National Forest. Jameson's second wife, Jenna Clark, has declined to comment on the discovery of her husband's third mate. The question is now posed. Just how many fated mates does each werewolf have? Carter scrolled to the third article from 2011 tagged with Jameson Clark's name. It was an obituary for Jameson's second wife, Jenna. Jenna Clark, second wife and supposed second luminary of the reclusive Jameson Clark, surrendered to her 22-year battle with a rare form of cancer that infects the blood cells of werewolves. She was a doting wife and mother to the couple's 5 children. She lived her life fighting for werewolf equality and founded the Clark Foundation for Lone Wolves. The organization provides financial security for wolves who lose their luminaries. She was 66 years old. What the hell was going on? 3 fated mates? How was that possible? Was the guy crazy as the articles suggested, or did he know something that others didn't? Thanks to the Bureau's contact system, he pulled up Jameson Clark's address and jotted it to his phone. Knock knock. He jumped as Faith strode into his office. Jesus, Faith, what are you doing here? She dropped a giant paper bag on his desk. Feeding you? What kind of wife would I be if I didn't bring you dinner on nights you worked late? A wife on paper only? He sighed, but the food smelled delicious. His stomach growled, the traitorous thing. What's in the bag? Chinese. I was grocery shopping today. Did you know that your fridge is low? There's nothing in there but beer and butter. Anyway, I was stocking up at the store was in the neighborhood, and thought I'd stop by to drop off food. She unloaded the white boxes onto his desk, though he didn't miss that she wouldn't look him in the eye. I would have cooked something from all the goodies I bought, but I don't think I'm ready for that yet. Hopefully by next week the classes will have paid off and I'll be cooking gourmet. Gourmet? From your cooking? He pushed aside his computer, grabbed a paper plate and started scooping rice. You shouldn't be able to say those things in the same sentence. Kind of like the vows love and obey? They laughed together, and for the first time since before they slept together it felt the way it had before. I signed up for a few cooking classes at the senior center, she said. It's mid-session, so I'll be behind the curve, but they let me join anyway. Wasn't that nice? They probably don't care when you join as long as you pay the full fee. He plopped chow mein and chicken in foil on his plate and dug in. Thanks for this. No problem. After making her own plate, she perched on the edge of the chair across from him. What are you working on? Nothing. He waved a fork near the computer screen. Well, not exactly. Nothing. I'll be busy for a few weeks checking into new leads on a cold case. She shoved her cheeks full. What kind of case? One where kooky old Jameson Clark might be able to shed some light on what the hell is going on between you and me. Dry business stuff. Time for a subject change before she kept prodding. How's your blog? Grinning, she stabbed a chunk of pork. Good. Better than good, actually. Things keep going this way, I might be able to pay for Dawson's Yale tuition. Myself. Really? Hell no, but if I say the words enough, maybe they'll come true. Can ho? Right. She shoved the meat into her mouth. I joined an affiliate program where I put items on the sidebar that are linked to an online store. Every time someone buys through the link, I get a percentage. I've already made a couple $100. Great, right? That is great. He dropped his fork. You're well on your way. She smiled smugly. I'm still going to need you to help me pay for Dawson's tuition, but I might be able to pay you back sooner than I thought. Carter should have been thrilled for her. She was doing something she loved and experiencing early success with it. Instead, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. As crazy and traditional as it sounded, he wanted to be the one providing for her. He wanted to be her rock, the one she came to when she needed something, anything. He wanted her to have independence and trust in her strength of body and mind, but he wanted her to need him too. He was in Chapter 18. It had taken 2 long weeks for Carter to track down Jameson Clark. Those 2 weeks had been somewhat of a reprieve. If he hadn't had such an intense case to dive into, he might have obsessed over his wife, where she went during the day while he worked the road, what appointments she made, and whether or not she was going to wear that red sweater again. She was about to drive him crazy. Jameson Clark's case had come at a perfect time. While Carter had gotten a residence hit from the Wolfpack's computer system, Jameson's blue-shuttered house was vacant. Weeds had claimed the yard and the oak trees in front were in desperate need of a trim. Carter had gone to the post office and requested to know if a change of address form had been filed. It hadn't. Carter visited the house a second time and checked the mailbox. Empty. Either Jameson Clark didn't get mail or someone was picking it up for him. According to the Seattle Wolfpack system, Clark had lived at this address in the last year. Even if he'd told his friends and family about a sudden move, he'd still be getting junk mail. Parking in his usual spot down the street from Clark's residence, Carter killed the engine of his Tahoe and waited for someone to show up. It had been nearly 2 weeks of the same routine, the box was filling up, and he'd yet to see a single person show up to check the mail. His phone rang. Faith. He hated when she called. The fluttering feeling in his gut wouldn't go away until he drowned himself in his work again. Not to mention she always wanted to talk about trivial, insignificant things. What color paint did you use on the walls? How do you defrost using the button on the microwave? How long have you been using the same lawn mowing service? Hey Faith. Chicken or fish? I'm not cooking both in one meal. Which do you like best? Her tone was much too chipper for a Monday morning, but he'd learned over the course of living with her for a few weeks that she was undeniably a morning person after she had her coffee. Enough French vanilla creamer to drown Seattle. I was thinking chicken since we had fish a few nights ago. Yeah, chicken sounds good. Especially considering she'd burned the salmon to a crisp and the sauce she'd poured over the top had curdled. It had been seasoned all wrong with too much lemon pepper. He'd eaten it anyway, chasing each bite with a gulp of water, and had told her it was delicious. He simply couldn't bear to watch her face fall when he told her how utterly inedible it was. If you're in the mood for salmon again, she said, I'll make it. Since she moved in, Carter found himself in the mood for a lot of things he hadn't been before. Crispy salmon wasn't one of them. A beat-up red pickup truck pulled into Jameson's driveway. Chicken's fine, Carter said, memorizing the license plate. But are you using a recipe this time or going off the cuff? I don't know, she said, drawing the words out. I'm thinking barbecue. That would work. Even if she seasoned the chicken with something strange, the smoke flavor would still save the meal. Sounds great, Faith, thanks. I hate to run, but I've got to get to work. Wait, one more thing. I wanted to move a few dog training necessities from my place here so I wouldn't have to run back and forth on training days, and since Tracy is staying at my cabin, I thought it'd give her more room and back. Fine, Carter interrupted. Move what you need to. She should feel comfortable in the place she spent her days and nights. She'd already moved over her bedroom set in bags of clothes, a few dishes, a toaster and blender. Why shouldn't she bring a few dog toys and things to help her with her workday? Okay, great, she said. Thanks. As she ended the call, Carter pocketed the phone and got out of the truck. A short, squatty werewolf with half a head of hair walked down the Clark's driveway and popped open the mailbox. Excuse me, Carter said as he approached the shifter, who gave off a strong scent of bacon. Are you Jameson Clark? The guy turned and leveled Carter with a pair of haunting green eyes. Who's asking? Carter Griffin. He pulled his badge out of his coat pocket. I'm from the Enforcement Bureau, and I wanted to ask you a few questions. Rolling his eyes, the werewolf peered into his mailbox, yanked out a handful of advertisement papers, a couple envelopes, and then slammed the lid closed. If it's about the mortgage with Wilder Financial, tell Drake that the check's in the mail. I'm not here on the Alpha's business. Carter followed the wolf back up the drive and stopped on the lawn. I wanted to ask about your rumored luminaries. Rumored? The wolf spun, facing Carter. Is that right? Yes, sir. I read a few articles about the 3 luminaries you reported having in the last 100 years. I wanted to ask you a few questions about how that came to be. You making notes for the Pack newspaper? Going to write about how crazy I am? How I've become a recluse? I'm not writing a thing. Carter shoved his hands in his pockets. I'm here for personal reasons. Yet you whip out that badge like it's bureau business. You are Jameson Clark, correct? The wolf nodded, narrowing his eyes. How long have you been sitting in that truck waiting for me to show? Carter's lips twisted into a grin. Not long. Almost 2 weeks. How long have you been married? Jameson tossed the mail onto the bench seat in his truck and pointed at Carter's ring. Not long enough to make a tan line yet. I'm guessing a month. 3 weeks, Carter said, spinning the ring with his thumb. You. Jameson smiled, crossing his arms over his chubby chest. You know how long I've been married. You read the articles. You happily married Officer Griffin. Of course, Carter fired. Are you? You didn't think about the question long enough before you answered, but since you gave the right one. Jameson dusted lint off his shoulder, and Carter got the feeling he liked playing games. I've been happy with every wife I've had. I've loved each one wholly with every part of my soul. How did that work exactly? Carter felt his face scrunch. If you'd found your luminary, what made you think to look for a second or a third? Jameson took a giant step forward, until they were standing chest to chest. You think I killed my first and second luminary? You think I shot Francine because I was in love with Jenna? You think I waited for Jenna to get cancer and then went and found Cynthia? Of course that's what you think. That's what you all think. I'm tired of the bullshit, the lies, the sideways glances that isolate us from the rest of the pack. Let me tell you something. If you do the math, you'll see the truth. Carter squared his shoulders and looked down at the short man in front of him. There was fire in his eyes, and a spark of truth in his words. There'd been something about the dates that caught Carter's attention from the start, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. I read that Jenna was born a year after your first wife Francine died, Carter said. My wife passed away a few years ago. 25 years ago to be exact, the same year Faith had been born. Hope sang through Carter's veins, but he clamped down the emotion. No good came from hoping anything. Jameson backed against his truck, the anger in his sewage-green eyes simmering down. There's more to your story, isn't there? How did you know Jenna was your second luminary? That's a ridiculous question. Jameson laughed, the choking sound thickened. Staccato. How do you know? Because you want to provide for them, protect them and love them with every fiber of your being. You feel just as strongly about them as you did your first luminary. The pull is just as strong. Or in Faith's case, Carter thought it was stronger. What about your second and third luminary? Carter asked. You had two at the same time. How is that possible? Like I said, do the math. Jameson glared. Jenna was born a year after Francine's death, when it was decided that my first luminary would be taken from my life too soon. Fate must have intervened. And the year after my second wife was diagnosed with the rare form of cancer that strikes wolves, Cynthia was born. Jenna and I knew that she'd lose the battle with cancer from the moment I felt the pull to Cynthia. It was a difficult time for us. I can imagine. Carter's thoughts whirled as he tried to judge whether or not Jameson was full of shit. Thing was, he looked earnest. Once Cynthia came into our lives, Jenna dedicated the rest of hers to setting up a foundation that would take care of wolves who lost their luminaries in the case they never found another. I remember reading about that. Not every wolf found his luminary. Ones who never did could never understand the agony of losing one. Starting a foundation to assist with the soul-wrenching grief was an unbelievably thoughtful thing to do. But what did this mean for Carter? The chemistry he'd had with his wife had waned almost from the start. Immediately after they'd bonded, their connection had started to fade. Would he and Faith end up the same way? Could he ever be enough for her? Carter had one last question for Jameson, one thing to ask that would determine if he and Faith could actually have a future or if their chance at a relationship would fail before it began. Tell me, Jameson, were the pulls to each of the luminaries the same? I'm not sure my answer is going to be the one you're looking for. You might find a more suitable one within you. Jameson pulled a mint from his coat pocket, unwrapped it and popped it into his mouth. But my connection to Francine, my first wife, was by far the strongest of the three. After that, the pull grew weaker. It's still there, but has diluted down over time. Carter's chest deflated and his knees shook. Jameson had the strongest pull to his first luminary, and each one after had been weaker. How could he and Faith ever have a chance to have a lasting relationship? He left Jameson's house and drove back to the office, turning up the radio to drown out his thoughts. Chapter 19. Carter tipped back his oversized mug and drained the last of his coffee. It'd gone cold. He'd been at his desk for the last 3 hours organizing files in the Wolfpack's database. He deleted duplicate files submitted by enforcers and backed up critical information on the pack's hard drive. Typing fast, Carter merged arrest records from the Seattle Wolfpack with others in the area: Portland, Sacramento, Lake Tahoe, and San Francisco, to name a few of the larger ones. Each of those packs had its own system, but as wolves moved from one pack to another, their records should have moved too. Was something their captain had been badgering the enforcers about. They'd talked about splitting up the task, but Carter had welcomed the large project. He'd been working on the merger for weeks before his shift. After you still here? Nate said, peeking his head into Carter's office. Thought you left at 5. No, I'm about to refill a second cup. Actually, if he counted, it was his 5th. Need something? Nate folded his arms over his chest and leaned against the doorframe. Nah, just finished up the report on your little exhibition in front of those tourists. The captain kicked it back, said I needed to explain in more detail why I made a phone call to the zoo shortly after leaving Seward Park. Thanks for taking care of that, Carter said, opening up the internet. Did you make contact with the couple again? Worry prickled the hairs at the base of his neck, making them stand on end. Twice. Nate picked a piece of lint off his sports jacket. They're either happily clueless, or I'm better at my job than I thought. Could be both, Carter said, relief coating his nerves. You heading home? My wife is cooking something special tonight. The way Nate said the word, as if he pushed it out as a deep growl, made Carter wonder if he should be envious of what he and Paisley had. He wasn't. He was, however, slightly jealous of the special meal. Carter hadn't had a delicious, mouth-watering home-cooked meal since he and Faith got married. What she lacked in culinary skills she made up for in cuteness, though. Even when she screwed up, she was laid back and laughing, happy that she'd tried. They now had the number for Chinese food stuck to the fridge door. Sorry we missed the wedding, Carter said, though he really wasn't. How was it? Nate's eyes shadowed over to a matte black. It was perfect. Gourmet food. Bold wine, open bar. And you should have seen Paisley, she was a vision. Looked like $1 million Barbie doll. I bet. Nate stared. The best part was the honeymoon, though. We didn't leave the suite for days. He grinned, though his eyes remained dark and unreadable. But I'm sure I don't need to tell you. You've gone through it twice. Speaking of, I didn't get the chance to congratulate you either. How was your wedding? In Victoria. The wedding had been surprisingly perfect, but the wedding night had been one big horrible bust. It was perfect. Lie. Better than the first time around. Absolute truth. Nate mumbled, his lips pressing into a tight line. That's good to hear. He tapped the door. Give Faith my best, would you? Carter nodded. Will do. Nate turned to leave but stopped himself and then spun back around. One more thing, Carter. I know that you're married now, and there's nothing to worry about, but if I don't say this, it'll bother me until I do. Carter sighed and shut down his computer. What is it, Nate? Paisley tells me you two had something special. That she loved you more than she'd ever loved anyone, and you broke her heart. They did? He had? And why the devil would she share that info with her new husband? Shock hammered through his system. He hadn't loved her. Not even close to what he felt for Faith, he finished. I had no idea, he said. What could he say? We've been over for ages. I know that. Nate adjusted his skinny black tie. And I don't think you have anything going on behind my back. Yet. But I saw the way the two of you were talking at the Owens' house, and I saw the disappointment in her face when she heard the news that you got married. Nate, Carter interrupted, putting up his hand to stop him. I'm not after your wife. You're not after her yet. Nate's body went rigid, nearly filling the doorway. I'm watching you, Carter. You won't get the detective position and my wife. Mark my words. He turned on his heel and left the office, leaving Carter stunned. What the hell had just happened? He felt reprimanded for doing something prematurely, something he had no intention of doing in the first place. It didn't make sense. I'm so tired of this bullshit, Carter said, and dived into organizing his desk drawers. Thanks for the help, Faith yelled to her cooking instructor as she exited the senior center. See you Wednesday. She tucked her casserole dish under her arm and headed to her car. Dinner would be late tonight, but Carter hadn't been getting home before 8 p.m. in weeks anyway. She thought he'd been avoiding her, but when she asked him about straight up, he'd said that he wasn't. Instead of getting home early, he'd been putting tireless hours in at the office, working long and hard to get the detective position, he'd said. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays after her cooking classes, she made Carter plates and left them in the fridge. She waited up in bed, updating Humperdinck's progress on her blog, writing new posts and answering comments on old ones. As soon as Carter's key turned in the lock, she listened for the refrigerator door. Every night, he'd eaten the food she left for him. She was either getting better at cooking or he was minding his manners and wolfing down the food anyway. As she hopped in the car and headed to Carter's place, her phone buzzed with a reminder. Enforcement Bureau dinner 1 week from Sunday. How could she forget? She'd been planning the menu all this week to prepare for next and practicing dishes to serve. She'd burned the casserole the first 2 times around, but this time with the chef's help she'd gotten it right. She hoped. Before class she'd even shopped for a dress to wear. A cute little black one. With strappy sandals. The shoes were comfortable and she'd gotten them for a screaming deal at the designer shoe outlet. After she pulled up to Carter's, Faith grabbed the casserole dish with one hand so she could grab her things with the other. She slung her purse over her shoulder and reached for the bag with her dress and shoes. All that was left to carry was a $15 bottle of layer cake, the perfect red wine pairing for the dish. Carefully testing the weight of the bag, she slid the bottle inside. Hands full, she backed into the front door, slowly pushing it open. As she skirted through the foyer and living room, her grip loosened on the glass dish. Make it to the table. Almost there. She rounded the corner into the kitchen. Her purse fell to her elbow, knocking her off balance. The dish twisted, tilted. The bag slid from her fingers. No, don't. As she raced through the entry into the kitchen, she saw Carter ahead, his back to her, earbuds in, oblivious to her presence. He swung the refrigerator door open, nailing her in the chest. She staggered back, clutching for the casserole. The dish wobbled, slipped, and crashed to the floor. The bag with the clothes and shoes and, oh God, the wine, slid out of her grip and landed on the tile with a glass-shattering bang. Jesus, Faith, are you all right? Carter slammed the fridge door closed and tugged out his earbuds. He stared like she'd sprouted 3 heads. What are you doing roaring through here like that? Cheese and chicken were everywhere. Her hair, her clothes, the floor. Good thing the dish hadn't been hot. From the bottom of the department store bag, a deep red stain pooled like blood. There goes dinner, she said, slapping her hands to her sides. He knelt and swiped his hands through the mess. Chicken casserole again? She nodded, and although she hated it, tears threatened to fall. She'd worked hard on dinner tonight. It took her an hour to get the right ingredients from the store, another hour of prep, measuring things out just right. She was looking forward to seeing if she'd finally nailed it this time. If it's any consolation, he said, shrugging, I didn't care for the first 2 attempts. This one was going to be different. It could have been great. It could have had class. He glowered up at her, raising a fist. It could have been a contender. Oh, stop. You're a horrible Marlon Brando, and the movie wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Faith huffed, struggling to hide her frustration, and pushed her hair behind her ears. You remember it? Of course I do. She picked chicken out of her hair and flung it to the floor. It wasn't that long ago that you picked it for our movie night. He stood staring. I thought you'd fallen asleep. I did twice, but I saw enough to know it didn't deserve an Academy Award. Ripping a towel off the counter, she bent to her hands and knees and started cleaning up the mess. What are you doing here anyway? Tension coiled through the air like a whip. I pay the mortgage. Carter growled from low in his throat, the way he had when they were tangled in sheets at the Monarch. I'm pretty sure I can be here whenever I want. The temperature in the kitchen skyrocketed as Faith got the feeling he was staring at the back of her head. You okay? She looked at him over her shoulder. What's wrong? Nothing. His jaw ticked, clenching and unclenching as he stared at the cabinets above the stove. Why would you question me being home? I'm here every night, aren't I? I meant, what are you doing home so early? She continued scrubbing the mess. You never make it for dinner. Call it a bad day. He huffed from behind her, the sound short and irritated. An epically bad day. I'd offer you a warm dinner and a glass of wine to take the edge off, but she stood to face him. Unless you want to eat off the floor with Humperdinck, I'm out of options. You know what? That actually sounds like a great idea. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing the ink lacing his wrist. Why don't you go change into something not smelling like cheesy fowl, and I'll clean up this mess. We'll eat on the back lawn. That sounded amazing. She'd been eating alone at the kitchen table too many nights, with late-night reality television her only companion. Maybe she and Carter could finally break the rut they were in, and he'd stop avoiding her like the plague. I'm in, she said. But what's on the menu? He strode into the kitchen and dug around for a pot. I'll cook. You change. Meet me out back in 25. Carter cooked? How'd she not know that about him? His kitchen was spacious, with stainless steel appliances, glossy black cabinets, and sand-toned granite counters, the perfect setup for someone who enjoyed cooking, but the refrigerator and cabinets were sparse and the counters were barren. Time to see what the hunk could do. She saluted him with flimsy fingers. You got it, Chief. As she turned into the living room, Faith got the heart-lifting feeling that the storm brewing between them was about to clear. They'd eat on the back lawn, drink wine, and laugh about how stupid they'd been. She'd talk about her cooking classes and how she almost burned down the senior center when she left. A batch of cookies in the oven at too high a temp for far too long. He'd talk about work and the case that had him twisted into knots. They'd come inside when it got dark and watch a movie like every other Friday night. She'd even let him watch on the waterfront and pretend to be Marlon Brando again if he wanted. This was going to work, they'd finally be friends again. She scratched her head as the F word struck her funny. Why'd the word friends feel so wrong? The doorbell rang. Got it, Faith said, and checked her appearance in the mirror on the coat rack. Before opening the door, she almost laughed at the sight, strings of dried cheese in her hair, wet meat sauce covering her chest and arms, and an embarrassed blush flushing her cheeks marinara red. She swung open the door. Paisley. The name whooshed out of her. What are you doing here? The model flipped her fine layers of golden hair over her shoulder. I'm looking for Carter. Is he here? Yes, he's in the kitchen, but... Thank you, sweetheart, Paisley interrupted, pushing inside and heading to the kitchen. Carter, can I talk to you for a second? It's about the bureau. I guess. He peeked his head around the corner. Is Nate with you? No, just me. Paisley's voice was so high and sweet, it gave Faith a headache. All right. He disappeared into the kitchen once more. Watch your step. Through the entry. Freak casserole accident. Pursing her lips, Faith watched Paisley charge toward the sound of Carter's voice, her size 2 hips swinging like she was trying to break them off. She'd probably gotten her sexy swagger from years of sashaying down the catwalk and her rail-thin Barbie figure from years of starving herself, no doubt. Come in. Faith mimicked the perfect hostess, playing out how the scene should have gone. Smiling wide, she stepped aside to allow the guest to enter. Though Paisley was long gone. Make yourself at home. It's so great of you to come. May I take your coat? She said to no one. Faith stood at the entry to the hallway on the opposite side of the modestly decorated living room, watching Paisley Brooks Ramsey step over the casserole catastrophe and disappear into the kitchen. Instead of bolting for her bedroom to change into dry clothes, what any normal person would have done, Faith leaned against the wall into the shadows out of sight and listened. Carter dumped a can of corn and a sliver of butter into the pot on the stove and stirred. He couldn't cook, but he could fake it. What's this about? Please don't let it be about what Nate was worried about. Paisley opened the fridge and bent to peer inside. I like the married you. You've got chick food. Vegetables, vitamin water, special K-bars. Who would have thought? She took out a bottle of Stella Artois and wagged it around. Bottle opener. So you're solo tonight. Carter took it out of the drawer and set it on the counter. Does Nate at least know you're here? Of course not, he'd blow a gasket. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. She popped the top of her beer and drank. Why do you want the detective position? Carter. He got to work prepping the indoor grill for steaks. That's why you're here? To determine if I really want the job. Relief soared through him. Nate had been wrong about his wife. Clearly she'd gotten over Carter. The disappointment he claimed to have read on her face when she discovered he'd gotten married must have been misinterpreted. Tell Nate I've dreamed of working the position since I started in the department, Carter said. And I've worked my ass off to get to this point. Deserve it every bit as much as he does. I'm not here on his behalf. She tapped her boot heel against the base of the cabinets. So you want the job even though you'll be working long hours away from home? Your wife is okay with it. He threw the meat on the grill and seasoned the steaks with garlic, salt, and pepper and zoned. Where was she going with this? I mean, you're newly married to that fragile wife of yours, she said, coming to stand next to him. She reeked of floral perfume, lavender and something spicy. He fought the urge to sneeze. Won't she worry when you're running late at the office or being swept away to bureau functions that last an entire weekend? She's not fragile, Carter corrected. She's not like us. She leaned back against the counter, arching back slightly to accentuate the perkiness of her silicone breasts. They looked new. She's not confident in her sexuality and her ability to keep a partner happy. How did the conversation veer into inappropriate territory so quickly? If I'm not mistaken, you're newly married too. Are you going to feel the same way if Nate gets the position and is gone from home long hours? I think I might get lonely from time to time. Her red lips pursed as she curled her lips around the neck of the bottle. She took a slow drink. measuring him before she whispered, "I'm here to see if there's something I could do to take care of that." He got the message loud and clear, only there was no zinging response to the words. No excitement at the possibility of getting in bed with Paisley again, or sneaking around behind his competition's back. 3 months ago, hell 3 weeks ago, before he'd proposed to Faith, he might have jumped at the chance to have something physical with Paisley so long as she wasn't married. Of course, that's all it would have been, physical, but it would have been fun. Now there was nothing. No desire to take her up on her offer, even if it was something thrilling behind the scenes. Something had definitely changed. A thumping sound came from the direction of the hallway. Carter strode around the wall separating the kitchen from the living room. Faith. His sweet little roommate was the reason things were suddenly different. He couldn't deny it. She was getting under his skin, and damn it if he didn't like it. If she would stop making it so difficult for him, bending over to scrub the floor or wearing those soft sweaters every day, he might actually have a chance at resisting her. "Be right out," she hollered from her room. Good. She hadn't heard what Paisley had said. For a second there he thought that she might have been eavesdropping on their conversation. That could have been bad. "I think you should go." He took Paisley's beer from the counter and tossed it in the recycle bin, then flipped the steak so they wouldn't burn. "I won't tell Nate that you were here as long as you never ring my doorbell again." She tilted her head to the side, studying him. Her blonde hair fell over her shoulder and her eyes gleamed a sparkly shade of blue. The woman would be beautiful if she wasn't so deceitful, but snakes often had the most beautiful design on their scales. "I'm telling you now, Carter, when that wife of yours starts feeling lonely, she'll look for other things to keep her busy too. We're women." She shrugged. "It's in our nature. Don't say I didn't warn you." He didn't have to worry about Faith cheating or how that would affect him, because he wasn't going to let her get that close to him. He wouldn't give her the chance to hurt him the way his ex-wife had. They were friends. They'd be divorced once he settled into the job. She'd move out and things would go back to the way they were before. A spike of something cold and bitter struck him in the gut. After Paisley left, Carter laid out a red flannel blanket on the back lawn. The cold feeling remained, spreading to his hands and feet. He lit a few of the torches lining the grass and set the plates down, and then rubbed his hands together to bring the feeling back. When Faith didn't join him, he went back inside to see how much more time she needed to get ready. He knocked on her bedroom door. No answer. Faith. He liked her being so close. A few doors down rather than a few football fields away. Dinner's ready. Why couldn't he ditch the hollow feeling in his stomach? This wasn't a date, though he had to admit he'd set it up as if it was. He cast a glance back at the yard. Wine flickering lanterns, a blanket to keep them warm on a chilly night. Who was he kidding? He'd totally set this up as if he was trying to impress her. What the hell did that mean anyway? That's not what he wanted, was it? "Eat without me, Carter," she called, her voice weaker than he'd ever heard. "I'm not feeling well." He tried the handle. Locked. "You sure?" "Yeah, I'm going to bed." Long agonizing pause. "I'll catch up with you tomorrow." Her voice cracked. He felt the tear in his chest.